Hello, I'm Mark Brohan, and I'm Vice President of B2B and Market Research Development at Digital Commerce 360. And I am your moderator for today's e-commerce chat brought to you by Irish Titan and BigCommerce. And today's topic is Unlock the Keys to B2B E-commerce Success. And we picked that title for a reason. Why? Because it's not open-ended, it's not broad-based. Rather, what it is, it's a journey, it's a roadmap, it's best practices, it's breaking down responsibilities, it's looking at things from an ROI perspective, and that applies to companies of all size. And so, if the roadmap is laid out and the steps are followed, and you look at all the pieces of this big moving puzzle called B2B commerce, then indeed, you can unlock the secrets of B2B commerce. And we're just thrilled to have some people here who are in the trenches, know the technology, know the business strategy, know the outcomes, and they're going to give you a lot to think about this afternoon. But primarily, our aim for you is to come away with best practices that you can take and do right here, right now, back to your organization, that apply across any size platform, because when it comes to e-commerce, it is all over the place. But you got one thing in common: get the platform right, the strategy right, the execution right, you've got success. So we're being joined by Mike Powers, Director of E-commerce and Digital Marketing at Alaska Rubber Group. We're being joined by Darren Lynch, the founder and CEO of Irish Titan. And we're being joined by Ali Salirod, who is the Enterprise Sales Director for BigCommerce. So gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for your time. And we're going to get right to it here. So our first question is very much top of mind with anybody for B2B these days, and that is COVID-19. Duh. Now, I say duh for a reason because, yeah, we know it's a crisis. You've known that since March. You've dealt with it since March. But what we're seeing in e-commerce here is unprecedented on the B2B side. Why is that? A, because it's speeding up timelines by 3 to 5 years. My colleague Paul and I have been talking to people who have been in the trenches where they're planning something 2 years from now. Guess what? They're scaling that down to 3 months. That's how important this stuff is, but it's whipsaw. There are some segments that are growing by leaps and bounds. Other ones, because their economy is locked down, because the market is locked down, because COVID locked it down, they're still struggling. But everybody now is looking to do digital, and those who do it well and execute, they're going to come out ahead. Those who don't, unfortunately, get left behind. So rather than being top of mind, it's not just top of mind, it's paramount and critical. And that's why I lead to our first question, which is COVID-19 is forcing many B2B buyers and sellers to expedite their use of B2B commerce, in many cases for the first time. So how can manufacturers, distributors, and others form a strategy that can work for them? And Darren, let's start with you on that. What's your take on that one? It's a big one, but it's an important one.
Yeah, and thanks for having us, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. I think that the environment we're finding ourselves in is accelerating decisions with more pressure wrapped around those. And so, B2B merchants are finding themselves either in a situation where they already have a channel, might be primitive, might not, but they have an e-commerce channel, or perhaps they don't yet. And there are different strategies to account for each of those. If you have that channel in place, I think what we've seen are those merchants doubling down on that channel for either necessity or out of wanting to capitalize on unfortunate circumstances. Those who haven't had a channel yet were forced to determine whether they wanted to invest in that or not. And so it was a bit of a gut check time. And what really started to emerge there was a vision around rigid scope, because you need to move fast right now to make up for any lost ground if you don't have that channel in place already. So what we've seen there are those merchants applying a lot of hard criteria around what they need to launch and pushing fast on that to launch with maybe a smaller subset of products or a smaller subset of channels that can access the new e-commerce site, so that they can get something up and running effectively. Back to that first group, and then I'll wrap up. That group that already had a channel, what we've seen is an investment in marketing, and thought leadership, in marketing automation, in those activities that frequently are overlooked in e-commerce in general. I think they're overlooked to an even larger degree in the B2B space. That group that has done well there are those that have invested in those marketing strategies from a B2B perspective.
And Mike, we've known you for quite some time here, and you've this kind of ain't your first rodeo, to use an old phrase here. But let's get nitty gritty here, because if you're expediting, why and how are you expediting, and how is that facilitated or put on more of a fast track because of the whole COVID situation? So let's hear what you folks at Alaska Group or at Alaska Rubber are kind of up to these days.
Yeah, I mean, for me, kind of showing the practitioner shoes, I was brought on 30 days before COVID really hit, right? And so, for us, it was extremely important that as a distributor, industrial distributor that did not have a developed channel yet, we needed to move fast. And so we needed to focus in segments of this project. We couldn't be paralyzed by analysis, whether it's content marketing or having the tons of great looking landing pages. We looked and said we need to make sure that we have our ERP connection solid. We needed to make sure that when you're dealing with B2B buyers, they need complex pricing, and in some cases complex ordering methods like an approval process. We wanted to make sure the foundation of our offering was strong. And our company, and speaking with my COO, digital transformation was something on a whiteboard or a blackboard like Darren that distributors, mid-market distributors, had up there, and it really never went away. A lot of times excuses, or we don't have an in-house expert. Well, COVID was that wrecking ball that kind of came into the organization. And so at Alaska Rubber Group, we realized that, we need to make sure that we need to get our B2B buyer registered, engaged with the website. They need to know how to easily get in there and place an order. But lastly, the one point I want to make sure is when you're dealing in the industrial distribution space, product data and product experience product information experience is extremely important. SDS sheets, making sure that when you're dealing with fittings, adapters, that all of the necessary parent-child mappings is there, so that a B2B buyer is not going to be confused. So product data, ERP connectivity, and making sure that the B2B buyer can seamlessly register and check out. Those were things that even today are extremely important to bringing that time or shrinking that time frame.
Mike, what's your take on things? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that two great points there made by Darren and Mike. The one thing that I would add to that is, and I think it just depends on where you are in your digital maturity scale. Darren, you had hinted at that. Do you already have a channel today that you need to optimize, or are you just getting your feet wet? And so I'm thinking about the folks where COVID is accelerating their need to get online today, where they've had that digital transformation on their whiteboard for a long time. And with those folks, my guidance would be to create this strategy. Don't do it in a vacuum. There's a number of organizations out there that can help you. Darren's company, for one, does consulting and has been in the e-commerce space for a number of years, worked with a ton of different B2B companies to help them grow and create their online business and grow it. Mike has been around the block, like you said. This isn't his first rodeo. If it is your first rodeo, find someone like Mike to mentor under. A. B. Find an organization, a consulting firm, an agency, a system integrator that can help you. And then start mapping out what your goals are, what your potential roadmap would be, and get in the game. And that would be my advice to folks that are just starting out. Don't hesitate. Get some mentorship and get after it.
And Mike and Darren, we're going to pivot back to you for a second here, because before I leave the topic of expediting the use, Darren, what are you seeing in terms of timelines being expedited? And then what's coming first? That's my question. So, I mean, my colleague Paul and I have talked to people where it was 2 years, then it became 18 months, and now it might be something that's 3 to 5. So that's time compression on steroids. So what kind of actual timelines are you seeing with the B2B companies you deal with? And then after that, what's a good best practice you can leave people with for our first question here about what they can do to make sure that the expedited use of all this and on the fast track doesn't get so fast tracked that it becomes basically shooting yourself in the foot. So I want to hear a best practice too at the end. But first off, timelines. What are you seeing? What kind of acceleration specifically are you seeing from people you work with?
Yeah, timelines are definitely accelerating. I think a lot of implementations in years past took longer, sometimes for valid reasons and sometimes for invalid reasons, not necessarily nefarious, right? But it's sort of that analogy that your closets expand and take up the room available, right? And so sometimes if there's not as much urgency, a project can take longer. In years past, some of the systems just weren't as stable. B2B e-commerce, from a technology perspective, has matured far more than D2C in the last few years because it kind of lagged in adoption, and more of the functionality has been built into the platforms. The platforms themselves are more stable. So now that they're stable, you can compress some of those timelines. But we are seeing a further compression of timelines beyond that, where, yeah, we've had 2-year-long B2B projects before, sometimes because the data hygiene is atrocious, sometimes because the ERP integration is a real challenge and takes a while to work through. Those things are not as problematic anymore. And so some of that compression is happening, first of all, because merchants are making decisions faster. I will say that I've seen since COVID, while we're still sort of on that topic or overlaying everything, I've seen decisions made faster in the last 6 months than previously. Not dramatically, but definitely faster. I think there's just a little bit more decisiveness, trying to capitalize on either opportunity or find a lifeline. So that's compressed timeline. Pardon me, Mark?
Ali, just have a point to make.
I was just going to tee off on that point. I would love Mike's, as a practitioner, his thoughts here as well. But earlier, as Darren mentioned, these projects could take a year, 18 months, 2 years easily. And when you think about the person that's getting their feet wet with B2B e-commerce, they don't necessarily have an owner of that. So I suspect Mike obviously owns that within his organization. If you've got that person within the company that's responsible for the B2B e-commerce business unit, because it is a whole new business unto itself, that makes accelerating these decisions in this process easier. If you rewind a couple of years ago or pre-COVID, you'd get a lot of different stakeholders in the room. You'd have the sales leader, you might have the inside sales group, you might have IT, you might have marketing in the room, and there was no real owner, Mark. And what tended to happen was people would try to boil the ocean and solve for every potential problem without someone that actually just owned the decision and said, this is what we need for today. So just to add to Darren's point, I think it's accelerating, but these organizations that are getting their feet wet need to think about, who's our e-com leader? We're never going to get it right at the first go. Assign that person and let them sort of run that project for the most part. I don't know, Mike or Darren, if you have any thoughts there.
Absolutely. I'd love to jump in. So back to resources available for a practitioner. Ali, Darren, both of you mentioned it. We have Mark and Digital E-commerce 360. There's a plethora of information out there. Back in 2015, when I replatformed a Janssen distributor, that build, the goal was 12 months. We went live in 14 months, right? The criteria was, back in April of 2015, we needed ERP expertise. We needed somebody with product data enrichment experience. We needed punch-out integration. And so those three things were extremely important to us. And, with the goal of going live in 12 months and going live in actually 14 months, January of 2017 is when we went live. You're absolutely right, Ali. There is a lot of things along the way, but you need to have somebody in the organization, whether it's one person or a small committee, that owns or is responsible for all of it. Now, in that particular role, we were able to, as a mid-market Janssen distributor, achieve about 30% of total revenue through e-com. But it was in chunks, right? So whether it was making sure that the taxonomy and the data enrichment was being handled correctly, or a punch out, making sure that our punch out integration with the higher ed customers we had, you can't do all of it at once. You need to make sure that you do this in chunks. And back to where I'm at today, working for an employee-owned company where a board is coming together and saying, listen, we have 11 branches in the Pacific Northwest. Our e-commerce leader is the GM of our digital branch. They own the entire strategy. They're going to man that warehouse. They're going to hire for that warehouse. So it's pretty amazing. And also, we are looking to go live January 1st of 21, and we execute an agreement on March 31st. So that time frame is compressed quite dramatically from when it did back in 2015 for me.
And Darren, let's start with you for this next one here, which is, let's get some nitty gritty here on, frankly, technology planning, evaluation, kind of rolling from there. And here's why I bring that up. Unlike business to consumer, where it's basically one industry and one transaction set, it's much more. There's much more complexity to build being holistic from a technology perspective in B2B. Why is that? Because I will tell you, once again, my colleague Paul and I, we've done many stories, and we've talked to a lot of distributors and manufacturers day in, day out. And this one's not uncommon, which is, okay, they're finally ready for it. Blah, blah, we're ready for it. They go out, they find themselves, just this state-of-the-art, beautiful platform. They buy the car, they got the keys, they're ready to go, then guess what? We've been talking to companies where it became 2 years after that they actually got going, only because they had to think about, we have 6 to 7 to 5 to 10 different ERP systems, some homegrown, some acquired, all over that, and guess what? That was such a mess that we couldn't plug into our beautiful new front end, and so now we're looking at a major ERP supply chain investment. Or they did not have a chance to think about what's involved with the customer service, the personalization, the whole mapping out. So it's not just, to use an old phrase, it takes a village of technology, but a lot to think about. And I understand that why this gets complex and it gets angst-filled when you're on a super steroid enthused deadline because of COVID. So Mike, how do B2B companies, Darren, let's stick with you. How do B2B companies of all sizes evaluate, procure, and execute a viable B2B commerce technology plan? And be specific, if you would. What works, what doesn't, and what are the pieces of the pie you simply can't miss and need to think about first, last, and not second tier?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, so I'll try to cover just maybe a couple of points and let the rest of the esteemed panel chime in. But I think that the B2B environment is exponentially more complex than B2C. If I wanted to spin up a site selling green nights, I could do that pretty quickly, right? But when you're in the B2B environment, you have typically far more complex product structures. You might have thousands, hundreds of thousands of SKUs, and those SKUs themselves may have variations. They may be inconsistently named because the SKUs you're selling are coming from other B2B providers. So your product is complex. Your selling channel that exists and has some inertia is complex. You have resellers, you have distributors. I think we've all been in the e-commerce space for quite a while. I remember when the single biggest reason that people talked about hesitancy in the B2B space was channel conflict. That still comes up now, but usually not as a barrier. It's more like, okay, how will we handle this, right? And so that's complex, and the technology is complex. Luckily, the ERP and e-commerce platforms are pretty stable now, as already talked about. So I think some specifics that I would start with, I want to build on points that both Ali and Mike made. And Ali first touched on it when he talked about find someone maybe who can mentor you like Mike, find an agency or an SI to help, because there are lots of resources out there that can help. If I drop that down a little bit and build on some of Mike's comments about executive ownership, I think absolutely key is a spirit of collaboration, but underneath a benevolent dictatorship, right? Like, you need multiple people in your organization to be actively involved in your B2B e-commerce project, initiative, and channel, because it covers fulfillment, it covers customer service, it covers product, it covers sales, it covers marketing and branding. And so all of those need to be represented. But if we have all those involved with nobody in charge, it's not going to move as fast as it needs to. So you need that team with someone in charge making decisions that has executive support, okay? So that's the one area that I would start. I think the other thing I'll talk about before handing it off is that you should be very cognizant of not just launching your channel, but also building the marketing plan for that. One of the common problems is that people build it and they will come. We got the site launched, and then it's 2 years later before they start to capitalize on it. Like Mark, I think you alluded to, right? You need to be building that marketing plan, especially because B2B marketing plans have completely different philosophies and strategies behind them compared to the B2C marketing plans that we're all on the receiving end of, right? You buy a shirt, you start to get emails from Untuck It. With B2B, you need to think about thought leadership, longer lead times, educating your customers because you might have a complex product. So you need to be building that at the same time to capitalize on the channel that you're also getting ready to launch.
Mike, let's pivot to you and talk about evaluating, procuring, and building. But one of the things, because you've done this, you've kind of been there, done that a few times here. Also, what do you prioritize first? I want you to talk about that. But then also, when do you bring in the voice of the customer where it's early enough where you simply do not leave out that important perspective? So can you kind of talk about this question, but add those two twists if you wouldn't mind?
There was a lot there too, Darren. You unpacked a lot because you nailed it in the fact that, and Mark, I'll get to your point. You know, I think in distribution, a lot of these distributors think that, you know, when you build it and it's finished and the project's done, great, this is fantastic. No, that the fuel to the fire is the customer journey mapping, finding out the market segments, creating editorial calendars and best practices and all this content, which will long-term help you with customer acquisition, right? So that's going to be pretty important. Now, if you want to talk about, to Mark's point, customer adoption, well, you know, before we start going crazy and thinking as an e-commerce leader within an organization, some of us I've seen, and I've learned from experience, you know, you take this project and you run with it. It's so important not to be a lone wolf within an organization. I mean, I'll tell you right now, we are having conversations within the first 45 or 60 days of being on with Alaska Rubber Group, talking to the large oil and marine companies in Alaska and asking them, how are you using Fastenal? What's Grainger providing to you? What is your experience here? Well, you're using SideQuest or Coupa for punch-out ordering. What are your requirements? How do we make your life easier? So aligning with sales leaders to get your requirements for your build is so important. So surveying the customers in the beginning is extremely important. And, you know, for us, for me personally, I'm aligned with my COO, my head of purchasing, also sales. And we are all 100% on the same page with the entire strategy. But do not wait till go live to bring other pieces of the puzzle in. Please align earlier, you know, to Darren's point, you know, my focus always in year one from signing the agreement to going live and even in the year after is what can we do to make adoption seamless and easy for the customer? So those are some things there. And then to the acquisition side is, you know, customer journey mapping. Find out the different segments of customers and the buyers that you're dealing with, and find out what matters to them. It's so important.
Mark, do you mind if I chime in quick with one additional thought? Because I think that
by all means.
One of the things that we have encountered, and I would encourage our viewers, listeners, watchers to not do, is approach maybe the multiple initiatives that you have going on. Don't approach them sequentially. We've had merchants, B2B merchants, who don't want to start the e-commerce project until the ERP project is done. And you don't want to necessarily start them both at the same time, depending on the nature of the projects. But once your ERP project, which probably should come first, it's tough to have a successful e-com channel if you don't have a reliable foundation with your ERP. Once that's at a certain point, you should be starting your e-commerce project. Otherwise, you're going to have too much gap between the conclusion of your ERP project and the conclusion of your e-com project, and you'll have lost ROI in that gap. So we've encountered that multiple times where we sort of have to coach those merchants to compress those or overlap those and make those a little bit parallel.
Ali, what do you think?
I think a lot of good stuff here that both Mike and Darren just hit upon. And I want to kind of go back to the question of how do you procure it? How do you evaluate what you're going to procure and execute? And I think just to back up, there's sort of two themes I think about. And one is, and Mike, you hit upon this, it's not the field of dreams. If you build it, they will not come. I mean, you have to plan on educating and marketing, educating your existing customers as they're shifting to that channel or as you want them to adopt it more, and marketing to new customers because acquisition is key. I feel like traditionally when I work with B2B organizations, they're focused on their existing buyers and shifting more of that channel that is already transacting with them through sellers, over the phone, et cetera, through the catalog to the online or to the digital channel. That's great, but guess what? Amazon's going to get in your segment at some point in time, and they will eat your lunch. Look at what they're doing to every other category out there. So you have to think acquisition because you need to survive, and don't take the focus off of that. It may not be the primary cause for your decision to go online or what you need today, but have that in your mind. So one, if you build it, they will not come. Think about educating and marketing. Two, the second thing is, in some sense, you have to know that e-commerce, and Mike or Darren, one of you hit upon this, which was really a great point. It is a moving target. It's been evolving. It evolves every day as our expectations change, as the customer's expectations change, and the demographic of B2B buyers change. They're going to push us into different directions. There's no way to get it right today. You've got to do your best. You've got to plan. But again, I go back to this notion of don't boil the ocean. Think about that lens of what is of getting it right today. And to me, that means catalog where you are in your digital maturity curve, where you are in the digital maturity curve. Is your business digitized? Do you have an ERP system? Are your products and information in a good state? Are you ready to go online? So catalog all of that. Think about where you're on the digital maturity curve. Then start building out a roadmap for what you need today. What is a kind of a, call it MVP, or I heard the term MLP, minimal lovable product. And think about where you want to go and build that roadmap so that you start and you iterate, because this is all about being agile, about iteration and executing upon a roadmap. And it's the last piece I'll say is, it's not a one-time spend. Reconsider the investment model. This is a business that needs to be care and fed. It's not a one-time procurement of software implementation. There's people resources that are involved. There's technology, and there is a need to market it and grow it over time and iterate. So consider those things when you're thinking about how to get started and what works. Those things all work, in my opinion, if you factor them into the equation from the get-go.
Now, Ali, before we leave you in this question here, a quick follow-up. Best practice or no, which is we've covered companies that have kind of done both ways, which is how much benchmarking of the competition or technology in general do you do? I mean, I've talked to companies where they've said, we know our customers so well, nobody knows our space better enough. You hear that quite a bit versus, okay, we're going to go out and do two things. A, we're going to benchmark and see specifically what our 3 or 5 closest competitors are, as well as go and find that so-called quote-unquote best of breed stuff, if you will. So before we leave, I want the panel's take on this. Staying with you for a second, Ali. Good best practice, bad best practice, depends. What do you guys say? Ali, what do you think?
I think it's a great best practice if you can do it. If you can afford to invest the time to gather that information. One of the reasons I say that, Mark, is because, and Darren, I'm sure you've experienced this, Mike, you probably experienced this too. A lot of B2B organizations that I work with simply want to, again, convert folks from an existing channel to the digital channel. And they're not necessarily thinking about what is best in breed. And they think it's all about quick ordering tools, making it easy and taking the friction out of the process. 100% agree that that's paramount. You need to make it easy for your buyers to be able to find the products they want quickly and order them as efficiently as possible. But consider that the browse and buy shopping journey of retail e-commerce, that consumerized experience, is also important too for your customers to get to know your brand even further, to understand what else is in your catalog, and hopefully grow their lifetime value with you and increase their average order values with you. So if you're not doing that work, if you're not doing that work that you're talking about, Mark, where you're kind of testing your assumptions and seeing what's best of breed out there, you might get locked in the pigeonhole of just provide quick ordering tools and make this personification of the ERP green screen in a digital format online. No, that's great. You need that, but you also need to think about what else you could do to drive new customers and grow your business.
Mike, I see that head nod. You got something to say here. What do you got?
Ali, at the end of the day, B2B buyers are B2C buyers as well. They have Prime memberships, right? The personalization in B2C has for a long time outweighed B2B personalization and experience, right, guys? So the fact of the matter is, Ali, one of the things that from a distribution ERP side is you could have a pricing level with 9 tiers, over 1 million GPOs and contracts that are in there. And those in the beginning are paramount to the personalization. Now, I will say that, when you're dealing with a customer that has 300 end users, 260 ship-to addresses, you want to make sure that that end user is getting the right price at the right time and the delivery is happening. But, I'm seeing right now that the personalization and kind of delighting that customer is becoming just as important. But, for a B2B e-commerce or a distributor like myself, I need to make sure that the pricing's right, the product's right, the information's right, and then I make it super easy for them to go on their journey. But back to kind of the customer acquisition side, we need to delight those customers. We need to know that we know something about them when they're on our site.
And Darren, concisely, you're the last word here. Good practice, best practice, bad practice. What do you think?
Great practice within, if you manage your scope right? Like, everything in moderation is good, including moderation. I think Kid Rock said that. But if you in the discovery phase of our projects, we always do competitive analysis and personas and journeys. Now, sometimes we have to narrow that scope, but the absence of that is what leads to a non-strategic experience, right? Because if you don't lift your head a little bit to see what your competitors are doing, what their sites might be operating like, what their product set might be, you're limiting yourself to what you're going to launch. You can keep that within reason. You don't need to engage a high-powered marketing firm to do a brand strategy, competitive set strategy. You can. You don't have to, but you have to do at least that minimum exercise that I described. I think otherwise you're going to have an experience and results that are less than you're hoping for.
Hey, Darren and Ali, I just wanted to jump in because it's important to note, when you're sitting within the 4 walls of a distribution business, I use the acronym SAVVY: survey, analyze, validate, and implement, okay? Surveying other distributors in our space, similar ERP, analyzing the vendors in the marketplace that have that expertise and have done business or integrations with other like-minded distribution business, and then validating. Listen, guys, and I think, sometimes these sales cycles for a distributor that is looking to bring on an e-commerce vendor, those sales cycles can be really, really long, right? Through the RFP process. If you can really do as much surveying and analyzing of the industry you're in and come to the vendor that you're looking to work with and provide that information, guide them with other, vendors that are doing it well, and challenge them on their expertise and what great value they can bring to you, it's going to happen. It's going to help with that last piece, that implementation. You're going to feel very confident and happy with the last piece of that puzzle. And so I just wanted to share that based off what Darren said.
That's great.
Okay, let's go to our next question then.
Can I add one more thing on this topic? We kind of talked about what works a lot. Just one thing about what maybe doesn't work, or just a food for thought that I would share. Would love to hear the panel's thoughts on this, and that is, think about areas where you can simplify. And I've seen this too, is that we've got certain processes and workflows and things that we've done for years. And because we do them in the physical world, we need to absolutely recreate them one-to-one in this digital experience. And that may or may not be the right strategy. For instance, contract-specific pricing, it's great, you have to have it, but do you have to have it for every business? Could some businesses think about a tiered strategy, which makes it a little easier to manage, especially when they're first getting up and running versus when they're more mature? So I just suggest that in general. An example of that is, I see folks that want to do B2B2C or B2B2B, where the manufacturer wants to create their own sort of e-commerce platform that they then host, manage, and maintain on behalf of the distributor, and then the distributor uses that to take orders. That sounds great in theory, and then what happens is they end up customizing each one of these downline e-com sites to the point where they become an e-commerce platform provider. Could they simplify that, still offer that great service, but make that a much more templated and maybe tiered offering that they present back to their distributors or back to their customers? I think they could. They just have to think about those trade-offs and evaluate whether that makes sense. But again, the only point I'm making here is what works is consider where you can simplify when you're making this jump, or how you could change the way you do business today to improve upon it in a digital world.
Mark, I have to add one last piece, if you don't mind, to Ali's point. You do not want to put yourself in a corner where you can't scale anything, right? Right, Ali? So, guys, the fact is there's many, and I'm only speaking from my experience in distribution. There's sometimes a distributor will say, I need X, Y, Z, or I need these 25 things, and you know right off the bat, you're creating a custom developed website that is always going to be, you're always going to have to help or support. You're not going to be able to integrate third-party integrations or bring them up to a new code base because it's so heavily, it's such a highly, what's the word I'm looking for? Unique website. You're not able to scale it all.
Right.
Yeah, good point. Exactly.
And, you know, kind of dovetailing on that, I'm going to stick with a theme here, which is a couple of years ago, I did a story on a $14 billion components manufacturer, and they trended across a lot of the big verticals, auto, healthcare, so on and so forth. And they put up this beautiful site. Man, this thing was a sweet-looking site, functionality you wouldn't believe. I thought these guys got it nailed, which they did. And so, you know, and they put me in touch with, you know, for a detailed interview with their team, and they had like this really well-known, experienced digital technology, and he was like an EVP kind of guy in a $14 billion company. They're serious about that. So we're talking about the site, and it turns out that was just the first part of part one, plan A and B, which was they built this beautiful site to sell a couple of parts because they wanted to learn the rest of the channel because that's all they knew. So that was their jumping off part. But it quickly became they had a whole lot more technology evaluation to do, but they wanted to do it right. And they wanted to kind of scale quickly, but they wanted to kind of make sure that they looked at everything in the right perspective when they needed it and how to do it. So Darren, back to you here. What are the specific technologies that companies need to evaluate and implement? And it's more than the platform. How can companies put together a full roadmap to address all aspects of a B2B commerce technology infrastructure? And just to sum up, that company I wrote about, that platform was kind of their jumping off part. The rest to them was the great unknown. We'll build the roadmap because we built part of the bridge. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we've touched on some of this so far because really the foundations of your e-commerce channel are going to be your ERP and your e-commerce channel. I think there are some that are pretty close to must-have. I'll get to those in a second, but those have to be there. And as much as we specialize in e-commerce and the topic here is e-commerce, I don't think you can have that until you have a solid ERP because it's just too much to overcome. And so that technology roadmap starts there, and you want to understand where your ERP is in its life cycle, what connectivity capabilities does it have, APIs, etc. You want your e-commerce channel then to be able to talk to that, which is pretty common now. That in the early days was not very easy and was not very fun. That was one of the biggest roadblocks. So those two have to be there and have to be well fleshed out in that roadmap. And then what really ties those together that you need to think about are customers, orders, and products, right? I think they get overlooked sometimes in a technology roadmap because people think about the systems and the technologies and not the data that those house, because really the data is more important than those systems, right? The orders are more important because that's actually what generates revenue. So that data really needs to be fleshed out just as importantly, if not more, than which technologies you're going to use, which means that drives those selections of technology. That next layer of those must-haves that need to be included in your roadmap are things like a CRM, order management system, some of those sorts of layers that let you then start to capitalize on your system, on your e-commerce channel. So those are the next aspects, those next layers of your roadmap that you need to flesh out, but not until you have that solid foundation.
I would add, Mark, that in that world, and I think Mike alluded to it, so sorry if I steal your thunder, but depending on your business, and if you're a distributor that carries multiple brands, you're getting disparate product information. A PIM can be huge, especially if you sell through multiple channels, e-com being one of them, but also maybe through a catalog. A PIM can be one of those crucial components that you should consider at some point, depending on where you are in your maturity for e-commerce.
I would echo that. That's true.
Mike, what do you think?
I had PIM and CRM as the two that I think are must-haves, guys, right? So Darren, to your point, you know, when you have the ERP connectivity, you have the e-com platform. Well, at the end of the day, if the buyer's having a great experience, however, their 1-year bid with your company is up for renewal, and the CRM, you don't have a CRM, that CRM is so important to keep, you know, you need that data from the street. You need that intelligence to make sure that you're ahead of the curve so that you can delight that customer and say, listen, we know we're 40, 60 days out from, you know, you guys potentially going back out to the marketplace. What can we improve upon, or how do we keep this with us, right? So CRM is huge. Listen, PIM is very, very important. You know, especially if you're even, the third thing I have is punch out catalogs. You know, if you have a PIN where you're able to seamlessly create punch out catalogs for your other customers and manage it there, we're in the process of looking in the 30 to 50,000 SKU range of data enrichment, right? And so a lot of parent-child combinations. Ali, you need to have a place to manage that. And then also customer-specific catalogs, where you want to display a catalog that is unique to that customer. A PIM's going to allow for you to manage it pretty nicely.
Yeah, I think just to chime in on this, a lot of these systems that we're talking about outside of e-com and ERP are reflective of where any of us, right, when we're speaking, are placing ourselves in that life cycle, right? Because if you don't have an e-commerce channel yet, PIM at the same time as an e-commerce channel is going to be too much. If you have that, though, then PIM, CMS, or CRM, et cetera, those are examples of what Ali was speaking about first, I think, where you can't just build it and they will come. You have to keep planning on investing in it. And the way I summarize that is it's farming, not hunting, right? Like you need to keep planting, you need to keep harvesting. And then the next year you plant and you harvest again. It's not a one-time event. And these systems that we're talking about, whether it's CRM and marketing automation or just analytics. We haven't even talked about analytics yet, right? And how are you going to measure the success besides revenue of your e-commerce channel if you don't get a sense of visitors and time on site and conversion rate and all of those sorts of activities? So they're all examples of where you are in that life cycle and how you continue to farm it and not just hunt it.
Great point.
And let's go to our next question here, because we're kind of moving on some pretty important themes here, and I want to make sure that we get our full takeaway for things here. But excellent points. And then I think we're going to start with Mike on this one.
So, Mark, remind me of the question. We're moving on, right? Correct?
Yes, we are. We're going to get our next question up here, and then. But while we're doing that, Mike, just a quick segue from your point to our current question, which is. What is and concisely if we could, but how do you know what to put in first, and then just have to kind of learn from experience? Quick little anecdote. Did a story on a big healthcare distributor, beautiful site. It turns out they shot themselves in the foot with bad search because they had learned the hard way that a lot of their big buyers are so EDI driven, they came to the site to search and see what's there. And they found out quickly enough that their search wasn't robust enough, so they had to experience that. So quickly here, what's your, how much can you plan for in terms of technology versus you have to experience and maybe see if you have a pain point, then move and put something in?
No, Mark, great question. So again, having experienced this now on the second time, one of the things I learned was, of course, focusing on the end user, the customers, but also, guys, being a distributor of a manufacturer, these manufacturers have relationship with distributors across the country. One of the things I felt it was pretty important in my role was to align with our key manufacturers, find out what's working in other markets or with other distributors when it comes to technology. And for us, we were able to understand that for site search, there were some things that were very for synonyms or ways people search our website that we weren't aware of. But when I worked with the director of e-commerce at a Georgia Pacific or an Eaton, who I'm working with now, they have a ton of data they can share with us. Hey, these are the analytics, to Darren's point, on how people are finding products. One of the other things to circle back to what must-haves, what we're finding now is this: with COVID, we realized that we needed to implement business texting into our business with live chat. And so when you're talking about all of a sudden having somebody walk into our showroom with a broken hydraulic hose, that showroom is closed due to COVID. How do we get that end user to be able to take a picture of a broken hose and get it to a product expert? That's a must-have during these times where business texting and being able to provide curbside pickup of a repair, those are must-haves, and now we've implemented that as a new part of our business.
And a quick segue here, and Ali, we're going to start with you on this first here, is let's talk about the must-haves versus nice-to-have technologies framed against how exactly BigCommerce. Let's talk about some of the applications that you folks bring to this, and your approach to all this, and how you see this, and what your platform does, and what needs to be done.
Yeah, so these are the must-haves versus the nice-haves, right? Nice-to-haves. I think Darren hit the nail on the head earlier. The must-haves are an e-commerce platform. I would say at this point in time, I mean, we're well into e-commerce platform maturity. This is not 1999 or even 2010. Most of the e-commerce platforms out there in the space provide way more functionality than any organization is going to be able to build on their own. So there's still some laggards out there that are continue to build their own technology versus licensing a platform from a vendor like BigCommerce. So one must-have, I would say, look at an e-commerce platform. Don't reinvent the wheel. Two, to Darren's point, you have to have an ERP platform or some way to have control over what inventory you have, your product information, et cetera. As time goes on, that might grow to a PIM or some other products that you may implement. But at a minimum, you kind of have to have those two pieces of technology to make this whole thing work. On the nice to have front, and I think we lost Mark. There he is. On the nice to have front, to me, depending on where you are in your digital maturity, the PIM is definitely a nice to have. An order management system, and I think we're going to go into sort of how do we delight customers and maybe do more of the buy online, pick up in store and B2B in the next question. But if you wanted to do that kind of thing, you might want to consider that an ERP system isn't set up well to take orders and distribute them to multiple fulfillment locations or fulfillment nodes. And you might want an order management system, especially if you have multiple warehouses or physical locations where a customer can interact with you once we get out of COVID. So that would also be another nice to have and something you should consider. Last but not least, a nice to have. When you think about e-commerce, there's a big trend going on right now, which is headless commerce, and we hear that a lot. Headless can mean a number of different things to different folks. It can mean that we're talking purely headless, where it's a custom front end that is a PWA or React or Node or some technology that you're using to build that front end, or it could be headless via a content management system or a digital experience platform. I think those things are great, but evaluate your business and consider, do you look, breathe, and smell like the typical B2B buying portals or web store? If you do, an e-com platform is going to have that CMS capability baked in and be pretty good for you and do a lot. If not, if you need to provide more content, you have lots of content authors, and or for some reason you determine that you need a really extremely fast site speed, or you want to do something like create a PWA because your brand or your business is typically engaged with on a mobile device more heavily than a desktop device, that PWA might be the right strategy. Headless might be the right strategy. I think of that as a nice to have, certainly not phase one.
I'll jump in.
How does BigCommerce help with this? How does BigCommerce help with this?
BigCommerce provides you. Yeah, BigCommerce provides you.
What does BigCommerce bring to the mix here?
Yeah, BigCommerce brings to the mix a platform that is a software as a service offering. It's always up to date. We're enhancing that. There's roughly 60,000 customers that are taking advantage of the platform, and about 40% of those are doing both B2C and B2B at the same time. And a fair number of those are doing sort of pure B2B, strictly B2B. And what we bring to the table is the core e-commerce capabilities, a web store with the back-end administration that can help you merchandise that web store, configure your information, and sell those products online. In addition to that, we support a number of different third-party applications that you might want to plug in. So if you want punch-out capabilities, we've got integrations to punch-out together. If you need quoting capabilities, we've got integrations to different quoting platforms, et cetera. Also, we have 92% of the platform exposed via APIs, which make it really extensible if you want to do things like headless commerce, A, but B, also integrate to these back office systems like an ERP, which can be cantankerous, and you need a really flexible platform with heavy API coverage to do that, especially if you've got tens of thousands of customers, all with their own contract-specific pricing, and you want to be able to ingest that information quickly and delight them with the quick experience of showing them their price for their specific catalog. And then in addition to that, we've got a network of 5,000 agency partners, and I would say 100 or so in North America that are solid partners that have experience, folks like Irish Titan, that can help you in your e-commerce journey to not only assess your needs, but implement this technology and integrate it to the other systems in your tech stack.
And Darren, let's talk about Irish Titan for a sec here. What kind of, in terms of, let's talk about the capability Irish Titan brings, and then take a look at what is must-have versus nice-to-have technology. But first, let's kind of take a look at Irish Titan capability. What do you think there? Give us an overview.
Sure. So Irish Titan is an e-commerce agency. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, so I like to be able to speak plainly. Otherwise, I feel like my dad would hit me over the head a little bit. So spoken plainly, we're an e-commerce agency. So that means we build and grow our merchants' e-commerce channels. We do that, though, in a way, every company is unique in their own ways, right? But one of the ways that we're unique is this notion of business first, online second. And for any Simon Sinek fans that are listening, I'm a giant Simon Sinek fan, met him in person back in 2011, right when Start With Why was starting to take off. Business first, online second is our why. It's trademarked and hanging up by our front door. And the origins of that are because I used to be on the other side of the table where Mike is now. I'm not a designer or developer. I was a COBOL programmer a long time ago. I had to be the last wave of those. That I was purchasing and implementing large-scale e-commerce channels since '98. And what I started to see was there was an absence of providers, SIs wasn't even the term back then, but they could think about an e-commerce channel from a business perspective. It's not about the bits and the bytes or the pixels or the keywords, whatever the discipline is. So business first, online second is this philosophy we have that's ingrained in who we hire, how we work with our merchants, etc. And then the second thing that's a little bit unique about us is we do all of our work with just our Titans. That's how we refer to our employees. We don't have any contractors, freelancers, or offshore resources, and there's nothing wrong with those models, but I wanted to build kind of a different machine. And so we have all of our Titans, which are strategists, creatives, and developers, all working together with project management surrounding that, working with our clients. And we're only closed 2 days a year, St. Patrick's Day and the day after. But as far as the nice to have, the only thing I'll add there, just to take a little bit of a different spin on it, nice to have versus must-haves, I would apply that perspective to your product data set. Because a lot of B2B, as I already said, has hundreds of thousands of SKUs, always at least thousands. And one of the biggest challenges to a successful launch, successful in air quotes, meaning either time to launch or quality of launch, et cetera, is how that product data set is approached. And if you're integrating via Grainger and Fastenal and a lot of different sources, your product data set is frequently varied in naming structure, hygiene, et cetera. If you narrow that set that you need to launch with and go deeper with that, so you have better product content, whether it's FAQs or how-to videos, depending on what your product is, that will accelerate your launch. That core data set, however you get to that, that's a must-have. Those on the edge are more of the nice-to-have. So that's a different way to think about it.
Darren, by the way, you're dead on. By the way, you're absolutely right. The endless aisle is very appealing to a lot of distributors. I want to have 100,000 SKUs on here, but my core offering is 16,000 stock items. Well, you know, you can add to that catalog. This is a living, breathing thing when you're talking about e-com platforms. So I like that you just brought that up.
Yeah.
Mark,
okay, gentlemen.
Add one more thing, if I could briefly, is that we spend a lot of time focused on B2B commerce, really from a distribution standpoint, which is great. It's a big market that's out there, but let's remember too that if you're a manufacturer, your needs may be a little different, and some of these answers may vary. And so, there's probably a whole nother session on that, but wanted to tee that up. That the other great thing about BigCommerce that I'll add here is that we work a lot with direct-to-consumer brands. And if you are a manufacturer, you can do B2B and B2C on the same platform, and that's a value we can bring, which may not be as applicable for a distributor, but is really great for that manufacturer that sells through distribution and also wants to dabble in direct-to-consumer.
And I got to tell you, gentlemen, this is just, the hour flies by. It's been a heck of a lot of fun. I can tell you, there's been a lot of great takeaways from this panel. But before we wrap up here, I want to go one more time, first to Darren and then to Ali, and let's drive it home. The final word is yours. What do you want people to think about? What do you want them to take away from today's e-commerce chat? Darren, let's start with you. The floor is all yours. Bring us home.
Okay.
But I'll leave you.
I think I would start with really giving a hard look at where you are in that life cycle. We've talked about that multiple times. That is going to have the single biggest impact on your downstream decisions. And then I think the consistent data points we've seen between more successful B2B merchants and those less successful are three things: their approach to product, their approach to team internally, in terms of how they're going to have that spirit of collaboration with a benevolent dictatorship, and then their ability to manage that project. People overestimate what they can get done in 3 weeks and underestimate what they can get done in 3 months. So if you keep those three things in mind, you have knowing where you are, managing your product, and having your team that will commit to getting things done and then holding them accountable for getting those things done. That's how you can have a successful B2B channel.
Now, Ali, bring us home. The final word is yours.
Yeah, I would add again, going back to maybe one of the first comments, don't make these decisions or try to do this in a vacuum. Please reach out. Let's have a conversation and establish a dialogue. BigCommerce, Irish Tide, we may not be the right fit, but we can at least share information with you, start that dialogue, and start exploring the different options that are out there. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot that's already been done for you. So that would be my final point, and we would love to speak with you both here at BigCommerce as well as Irish Tide, I'm sure.
This has been just a very, very action-packed and fun hours. I just want to really thank, Mike Powers, who knows this stuff inside and out, and Ali Salirod from BigCommerce, and Darren Lynch from Irish Titan. So yeah, we packed a lot in here. The hour always goes by fast. But gentlemen, it was a pleasure having you on the panel. So thank you for that, and also thank you once again to BigCommerce and Irish Titan for being today's sponsors. And we look forward to doing more of these going forward. There will be a replay of this 360 e-commerce chat made available to everyone, and then you'll see a pop-up window on the screen asking you to provide feedback on today's content. If you can, please take a few minutes to fill this out. Your feedback helps us plan future e-commerce chat topics and understand what works best. You help us, and we'll help you. And then also, please keep an eye out for our weekly email to find out what other e-commerce chats and webinars we have planned. Visit digitalcommerce360.com to your upcoming schedule, or among this one, view our archived digital library and our content. But once again, Mike, Ali, Darren, thank you so much for an action-packed hour. And to our audience there, thanks and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
bye, guys.
everyone.
Bye, Ali. Mark.
Thank you.
Darren. Take care, guys. Nice meeting you.